as he has since the day before, and based on when people listen to this, probably the day of the UFC pay-per-views. Since this podcast has existed, Paul Fontaine is joining to talk about UFC 289. He's going to give his best bets, and we're going to catch up on how he's been doing on the previous best bets. But we also wanted to add a little wrinkle, because as I was looking at this show, I was like, man, who's going to buy this show? And I'm looking at it from more of a casual fan perspective, because as my UFC fandom has been interrupted by just so much other wrestling stuff, I'm not with the day-to-day with the UFC as much. And so I rely on people like Paul and Ryan Frederick to kind of keep me up. And so I thought it would be interesting to get Paul's perspective as a hardcore fan as well. What would be the selling points to this show? Like, if it was not part of Paul's process to buy every UFC show and watch every UFC show, like, what are the selling points for maybe that some of the casual fans don't see about why this show could be good? So first, Paul, welcome back.
Thank you.
The opener. You're like you're like the Devil Rays
Orange Cassidy.
Or from a wrestling perspective, you could do that. I would say, like, for the Giants, whenever they have whenever they want to put a space in to give their starter some rest, they bring in John Brebbia to come in and throw an inning to start the game. So you're the Brebbia here.
Okay.
But Brebbia is good. He's a good pitcher.
That's cool for me.
So let's talk about how we've been doing here with these best bets. How did you do for the last UFC show?
So the last UFC show was 3-0, which is good. Can't get any better than that.
Nice.
So overall, so overall 3-3. And if I had placed a $100 bet on every single fight, I'd be $42 in the hole, which is really basically even, because the casinos take a cut. So you kind of have to be a little bit over 500 to make money in gambling. So but that's not bad, not bad for a start. And and I got some, I think I got some good picks here. So and like, to go to your first point there, if I didn't have a podcast covering this, and I was picking and choosing which UFCs I would buy, and this, it's like, what is it, like $85 now?
Yeah.
I think it's like 60 here still. I might skip this one, but if I was really bored and wanted to convince myself to buy it, I think I got some selling points for you.
Well, here's what I really love about the UFC, and I mentioned this before, which is you get a little FOMO when you see all your friends talking about a show, especially if you're on Twitter. And, that's what I miss during Saturday nights. I'm seeing, like, you and Ryan and Andreas Hale and Jason Hagholm and Nick Baldwin and all these guys just talking about fights, and Kevin Iole. And I'm like, man, this seems like a lot of fun. And sometimes the fight may not even be good, but you just see so many people talking about it, you kind of get, like, intrigued. And if I was around Saturday night, even though this is not like a giant event, I would probably try and find my way over to Dave's to watch it, but have some stuff going on with the kids this weekend. Let's tackle that piece first, and then we'll do your best bets at the end.
Yep.
I know this was supposed to be a different fight as the headliner. It was originally supposed to be Juliana Pena in this role. She had to pull out, and she is replaced by Irene Aldana, she was supposed to be on this card originally against.
Yeah, she was going to fight Raquel Pennington. Yeah.
Okay, so she is now the main event fighter against the GOAT of Amanda Nunes here. That in of itself, when you kind of get like a fight that's supposed to happen and then it doesn't happen, and the main event is not as big anymore, because there's some grudge there with Pena, especially because she beat Amanda Nunes.
Yeah.
So that I was looking forward to that, but from Pena to Aldana, that does sound like a bit of a drop off.
I mean, yes and no. Personally, for me, like I wasn't necessarily interested in seeing Nunez against Pena again. The first fight, Nunez was coming off of COVID, and I think she took Pena a little lightly. So the second fight was basically an extended beatdown for 5 rounds. Like she didn't finish Pena, but she thoroughly dominated her.
Yeah.
And the only thing that would have been different, I think, in a third fight, maybe she would have finished her, or maybe we would have just got a repeat of the second fight. I don't think there's much chance that we would have saw another upset. Whereas with Aldana, it's a new challenger. And there's an interesting storyline here that I haven't really seen a lot of people talk about, but Ryan and I talked about it on In the Clinch on the Fight Game Media free feed, where we've had Mexican fighters fighting for titles this year and winning. And when a Mexican fight star, as you being a fight fan, it's the
Hmm.
same thing as UFC. I mean, they're like the biggest star in the world when in Mexico when they win a title. And we had Brandon Moreno win the flyweight title. We had Yair Rodriguez win the interim featherweight title. We had oh man, I'm drawing a blank here on her name. The flyweight, the girl that beat Valentina Shevchenko. I do this all the time, but I was there live. I saw it. And she's Mexican as well, and it was a great moment. So for me, like, I either am like
Alexa Grasso. I just looked it
that's
up.
it, Alexa Grasso. I'm so bad with names. This is why I have Ryan. So yeah, I mean, so for me, like, I think we're either going to see the GOAT do what she does, or we're going to see an incredible upset that's going to be a great moment. And I think those fans in Vancouver, this is the first time UFC's been back in Canada in 4 years. I think that they are going to react strongly to whichever one of those it is. Either, Nunez just doing what she does, or a great upset with Aldana winning. So either way, you win. And so I think it'll be a great moment. And we don't know how many times we're going to see Nunez fight again.
Yeah.
I think she's 36, 35, 36, and she's fought a lot. And she's kind of hinted at retirement. Yeah, 35 at different times. So you never know. And so for me, like as a big time UFC fan, I'm going to tune in when she's fighting.
That's a great point, because I felt that way even as guys like Anderson Silva got old because of the body of work, and you never knew when it was going to be over. You kind of wanted to see him, because you didn't know if you were going to miss
Yeah.
him, last fight or whatever. So that's a great selling point for Amanda Nunez and Amanda Nunez fans. What are some other selling points? I think I asked you to
Yeah.
come up with
Yeah,
3.
yeah, and I did, and I had a fourth as well, but I'll stick to main card because I'm trying to convince you to flop down the $80, and
Yeah.
you can get the prelims for free, so we don't need to talk about that. But the co-main is a great fight. Charles Oliveira, former lightweight champion, coming off losing the title, but before that he had a super long win streak, and he's up against Beneil Dariush, who himself is on an 8-fight win streak and arguably has already earned a title shot, but it's Beneil Dariush, and lightweight
Mm-hmm.
is very stacked with a lot of big names. Your Dustin Poirier, your Justin Gaethje, even Tony Ferguson, obviously Connor, like all these guys that you know more often than not UFC is going to go with the bigger name as opposed to the bigger guy that that's got a big win streak. And Islam Makhachev, for the longest time, the current champion, suffered from that, and then finally earned a title shot, and won the title. So I think this is where we're at with Beneil Dariush. If he can get past Charles Oliveira, you have to give him a title shot. And Oliveira, in the meantime, if he can beat another top contender, he can get a rematch for his belt. So it's a great fight. You've got both. Dariush is an incredible grappler, but Oliveira is a submission machine. Oliveira is probably a better striker, but Dariush is incredibly durable. And I'm just looking back at his record. He has been knocked out a couple times. So there is that damage. In fact, every time he's lost, he's been finished. So if it goes to decision, it's probably going Dariush's way. But he is vulnerable to getting finished. So I'm kind of leaning towards Oliveira. And we'll get into that in my best bets. But I think it's gonna be a great fight. And Dariush is kind of quietly entertaining. He's got a weird kind of charisma about him. remember a few years ago, I he called out like a 185-pound guy, like after his fight. Like he's kind of a weird dude.
You
But
know, both of these guys, and Oliveira, I would say was one of the stars of the pandemic and the
mhm,
empty arena scene. But both of these guys, during the pandemic, they fought some of their best. They were at some of their best, and so that not that that means anything, because we're back with fans and everything. But I
yeah,
just remember, like, if I think about the time frame of where the UFC was the only game in town when it came to the pandemic, because Dana White was just like,
yeah.
who cares about this virus? We're putting it in out fight now. They took protections and stuff, but that was kind of his mentality: is I'm not going to let this thing stop our business, and we have a fan base that supports us. Oliveira, you could point to as one of maybe the top 5 guys who took advantage of that time frame to become star and to keep his stardom.
Yeah, no, it's a great point. He fought, I'm looking at his record, 4 times in 2020. Well, I guess a couple of them were grappling matches, but yeah, he definitely, kind of solidified his status as a kind of an all-time great during the pandemic for sure.
All right, what else? What are some of the
Um,
other things?
so I said Nunez, I said Oliveira. We've also got a fight, and it's funny because I'm super excited about this fight. Ryan is super excited about this fight, and I was looking at his history, and there's a real good chance that a lot of listeners and probably maybe even you have never even seen this guy fight. Nate Landwehr against Dan Ige on the main card, featherweight fight. Landwehr last year had, I would say, the best fight of the year. Now, the fight that was pretty much the universal consensus for best fight of the year was Glover Teixeira and Yuri Prochazka, because it was
Hmm.
so back and forth, dramatic, and everything. But they had a fight on the undercard of a fight night. It was actually the co-main event, but it was in August of last year, and against David Onama. And this was just a back and forth war where these guys just went at it, like just threw down. Landwehr, I'd compare him. He's a modern day Diego Sanchez. Like he's probably never going to win a title, but he is always going to have exciting fights, and he's insane. Like he'll cut just the most bizarre promos after the fights, and he's the kind of guy that we'll get in this war. He'll be bleeding, and he'd go back and fight 10 minutes later if you ask him to. Like he's nuts. And I'm just like, I have super high expectations for this fight, as I always do with Nate Landwehr, and more often than not he over delivers. So I would say that fight is very likely to steal the show. I mean, I think most people are expecting Oliveira and Dariush to be the fight of the night, and it very well could be. But my money's on Landwehr and Ige, because and Ige is another one who's had great fights. He had a memorable fight with Calvin Kattar a few years ago.
Yes.
That got a lot of match of the year votes. So I think this match was kind of put there to be that kind of fight. And there's usually one of these on every main card, and this is this one. So
I think I may have even mentioned this last time we talked, but one of the things that you get if you just have an ESPN Plus subscription is at some point they put the pay-per-view up for your subscription. It might be 3 months old or whatever. But you know, there needs to be some sort of, and they may have this and I just may have not found it, but like to take a tile on ESPN Plus and say, here are the best fights of
oh,
January. Here are the
okay,
best
yeah,
fights of, whatever.
that's
So
a great
that
idea.
if you don't have time to go through every single show, you can just find like the most exciting fights or the biggest moments or whatever, because they have so much content. And all they do, as far as I know, is here's the last week's show and it's up
Yeah.
the full 7-hour stream. Then here's the pay-per-view and it's up, and half of the
You can search for fighters, I think. So like if you want to go back and look at Nate Landwehr fights, I think like you can just type his name in and it'll pull up his fights. So
yeah, I think you
for
can do that.
people listening or watching, I would, if you got some time, maybe do that. And you'll see what I'm talking about with Landwehr, cuz he's fun to watch.
Yeah, I keep telling myself at some point, and it may just be background stuff, but going through the catalog of pay-per-views that I didn't get to watch and just kind of having them running. And
Mhm.
because a lot of times, like, you can go back a couple years and someone will be on an undercard, and then you see them now and they're actually on the main card, and you're like, oh wow, like I'm interested and going back and seeing how they got here. I did that a lot during the pandemic as well, when and somebody who
Yeah.
was a big topic of last week for you, or for you and Ryan, Kai Kara France. Like
Oh
that's
yeah.
I watched him during the pandemic just by going through those shows, going like, because I was doing a little bit of, Moxley and I would do the
Yeah.
scouting and try and figure out, for these previews. And I was like, wow, like this guy's really dynamic. And so that's someone who I wouldn't have really caught on unless I was going back and watching old fights and stuff.
Yeah, no, I remember that with you and Mox, and you telling me his thoughts on Kai Kara France, and it
Yeah.
was kind of cool. And the other two main card fights are, they're Canadians, so that there should be good response. Mike Malott is a Team Alpha guy, with Uriah Faber and those guys, and he's been a coach for a long time, and this will be his second UFC fight. And Marc-André Barriot is a middleweight, and he's from French Canada, obviously, and he's up against Eric Anders, and that's a middleweight fight that'll kick off the card. So, honestly, every single main card fight has the potential to be, something good. So, I think it'll actually turn into a pretty good card, just not a lot of marquee value.
Yeah, I'm hopeful for, the people who do stick with the
Yep.
show, that they do get a good show, because a lot of times that is what happens is,
Yep.
kind of the underdog show can often over deliver. So I'm hopeful for that. And like you said, I think the Amanda Nunez piece, now that you've said it, that's probably your best selling point, is here's one of the
Mhm.
greatest fighters, of the last 10 years. And you never know how much longer she's going to fight. So, you got to take the opportunity.
Yep. And I think the hardcore fans that get most shows, for them, it's Oliveira Dariush. So either way, Amanda's there for kind of the casuals, and Oliveira's there for the hardcores. So.
All right, let's get into your best bets here.
Yeah, they're actually all on the main card. First one is actually Nate Landwehr that I mentioned earlier. He's got 77.5% ROI. And for those that haven't heard before, it's basically for every dollar you invest, if he's got 77.5% ROI, that's 77.5 cents of profit that you would make. So he's a plus 190 underdog, and he's actually 4-0 as an underdog in the UFC. So to me, that's like, it's a pretty good one. And Ige's had a lot of high profile losses as well. So I feel pretty confident about this one. Charles Oliveira in the co-main event, 57.6% ROI. He's actually a plus 105 underdog, although that line's been going back and forth all week. And
Why do you think he's the underdog here?
Because Dariush is really good. And Oliveira's coming off a loss. And but I
mean, he's
I
coming
would,
off of a loss, but it's like,
yeah,
a
I would make
loss
him the
from
favorite. Yeah, like,
this is a loss. He basically lost to the evil boss in the video
yeah.
game that no one can get past. Like, that's the loss here.
Yeah, well, I guess to answer your question though, is it just tells you how good Dariush is,
Got it.
and how good he's perceived to be. I guess
Right.
would be the best way to put it. But I do expect to finish here. I expect Oliveira to finish him.
Is there anything to? I mean, because we mentioned it, Oliveira was
Yeah.
so busy.
Mhm.
He became a star, must see fighter, but at the same time, being very active and very busy is putting wear on the tires, and then you run into the machine and you lose to the machine. And do you think there's any physical wear and tear coming off of this run that could be there, or is there a mental fatigue that's possible? Because this happens a lot in the UFC, where
Mhm.
you see somebody and you're like, wow, this guy was on a run. They had one loss, great, that's fine. And then all of a sudden, there's a couple more losses that come out of it, as obvious, but obviously they're also thrown into the wolves with the competition, because the UFC, they do not give you any favors whatsoever when you start winning fights. That you're just getting matched against beast after beast after beast. You don't get very many patsies once you get up to a certain level.
Yeah, I definitely think there's something to that, to what you're saying. The other thing you got to look at is, to Oliveira, he's 33 years old, but I think he's a very old 33.
Yeah.
He's been around forever. He's fought 30 times in the UFC since debuting in August 2010. So that's 30 fights in 13 years. And most of those have been wars. So, at some point that's going to catch up to you. And I look at a guy like him. I look at a guy like Max Holloway. that like at some point it's just going to catch up to you, and maybe that's going to happen here, and maybe that's what people are looking at. Whereas Dariush has, not fought nearly as often. He's basically the same age. He's 1 year older, but he doesn't have nearly the track record of these wars that that Oliveira has. So, that's probably part of it as well. But again, I still favor Oliveira, and he's got a 3-1 record as an underdog over his last 10 fights. So, I think that there's value there for sure. And then the main event is Amanda Nunes actually has a 44.8% ROI over her last 10 fights, and she's a minus 330 favorite, which was surprising that she's not a bigger favorite to me. I would have probably guessed she would have been like 6-1. So I think there's great value there at only minus 330. And, depending on when you're watching or listening to this, you might want to get in on this quick, because I think a lot of the smart money that comes in late is going to come in on Nunes. And,
why do you think
odds might switch?
Why do you think that is? If you were to guess,
the loss to Nunes for sure, or to Pena is part of it. Maybe some of the momentum of the Mexican fighters, could be playing a part with some with the odds makers. And to be fair, Aldana's looked good. Like she's finished in her last 2 fights, which doesn't always happen with the female fights. Her previous loss was to Holly Holm, former champion. But she's 4-1 in her last 5 fights. So she's not, she's a legitimate contender.
Yeah.
And again, it's short notice. So a lot of times weird things happen on short notice. So
strategy wise, for
the
the champion, it could often not be good.
But Nunes is 6-1 as a favorite, and obviously the one loss was that one to Pena when she was coming off of COVID. So I think she's fairly safe, and you don't usually get odds like that with her. So I'm going to jump on that. Yeah.
All right. You know what I just realized? UFC 300 is going to be next year.
Yeah, Jim Miller, baby.
That's insane.
Jim Miller, he won last week. He had his quickest knockout in history. Fight Game Media tie-in. The guy he beat is a good friend of James McDaniel that hosts.
No way.
That hosts the Boom. And he took the fight on 2 days notice, and he got knocked out in 26 seconds by Jim Miller. But Jim Miller's going to fight, and he'll have been on 100, 200, and 300.
Amazing.
So that's cool. And Ryan figures that's going to be April or May of next year. So crazy, right?
That is insane. But what if it's in May? They should just run Memorial Day weekend like they used to.
I know they like to take those weekends off.
Man.
I don't know.
They used to be such a big weekend for, but I don't want UFC and AEW to be going head to head.
Well, I'd rather they could just move AEW somewhere else.
All right,
about that.
All right, Paul. Thanks for doing this. I enjoy doing it. You kind of keep me in the loop on this stuff.